Okay, my name is Coco, and the essay is called Penetrating the Pink Wasteland, Gender and Environmentalism in Edward Abbey's The Monkey Wrench Gang. So I'm just going to read the excerpt. More than 40 years after its first publication, Edward Abbey's 1975 novel The Monkey Wrench Gang remains a major environmentalist text. Activists use sabotage techniques to protect their beloved Western landscape from industrial and commercial interference has inspired real-life movements such as Earth First and the Earth Liberation Front. However, the environmentalist project the novel describes is not as radical as it may appear at first sight. This article argues that the Monkey Wrench Gang's message of eco-terrorism depends on the reconstruction of a rigid gender boundary which turns the American West into a feminine entity that can only be saved through masculine interference. This gendered undercurrent is most visible in the novel's descriptions of the Western landscape. Abbey depicts it as a pink wasteland which he eroticizes, as he puts it, to clarify its relationship to its human protectors. Not content with occasional references to the land as Mother Earth, he depicts the American West as a semi-virginal wilderness, a feminine environment in need of protection from symbolic rape. The novel's main characters view their own relationship to the land in similarly sexualized terms, with George Hayduke, one of the characters, announcing that we're entering the vagina of the canyon into the womb of the plateau at the start of a hiking trip. For Vietnam veteran Hayduke, protecting the West is as much a personal as a political undertaking. After suffering devastating experiences as a soldier and war prisoner during the Vietnam War, Hayduke regards the West as a space where he can develop his masculine identity as a man controlling his environment. He therefore interprets the development of the West into a lucrative industrial resource and tourist attraction as a targeted attack on his masculinity, and frames his activism as an act of remasculinization or the large-scale negotiation and regeneration of the interests, values and projects of patriarchy. Well, I started writing essays at university, and when I moved on to do a PhD, my background is in humanities, mainly American literature and popular culture, and essay writing is very much a thing that you're expected to do. It's, as humanities scholars don't have fancy labs like scientists do, so writing and sharing your ideas that way and building them that way is very much how you do your job. So especially during my PhD, I did a lot of writing. I must have written tens of thousands of words, just building my argument, building my ideas, and that's how I got into it. And then after I finished my PhD, I did more academic work, but also branched out into different genres to reach wider audiences beyond the academic community. So that's how I got into essay writing. So this essay is an analysis of a novel by Edward Abbey called The Monkey Wrench Gang, published in 1975. And this is a novel about environmentalism. It is still a bit of a cult classic, particularly within the environmentalist movement. But it's also quite controversial. In some respects, it hasn't aged well, particularly how it writes about women. And it also has some racist elements that are problematic these days. And that really interests me, that contradiction between, being really radical and progressive on one end and quite backward and conservative on the other end. So when I first read the novel, I thought, that's really interesting, and then kind of put it to the side. And then later, years later, I think, decided to do an analysis of that. And initially I wrote a chapter about it for what became my book called Extreme States, but that's very academic and not very accessible to most people. So when I was asked by the editors of USSO, which is a website for early career American studies scholars, if I was interested in writing another piece for them, which I'd done before, I thought, maybe it's an interesting idea to kind of condense my argument and share it with a wider readership and see what kind of responses I get and build my argument that way. So that's how it came about. Well, I often, especially when it's an academic essay, I tend to respond to calls for papers. So someone might be looking at doing a book with essays on a specific topic that interests me, and I might be interested in putting a proposal forward. So in that case, I already have a kind of, bandwidth within I'll be working, because I know the topic, I know what kind of text they're looking for, and I start that way. Sometimes I start completely from scratch. But in all cases, I always start with a brainstorm, literally just pen and paper, writing down whatever ideas I got, what I'm interested in, what I might want to do. And then I put it to the side. I tend to work in short bursts, and then I take time off and do something else in between, because I find that my ideas come to me almost subconsciously when I'm off doing something else. And then when I get back to my ideas, they start making sense, and I start putting them in order, and kind of narrow down my topic and start working on a more concrete writing plan. Often, especially when it's an academic essay, I also have some research to do, so I have to go to the library, get my background up to scratch. And I write the first draft always quite quickly, usually within a couple of days, just to get my ideas on paper. And it's usually messy, grammar is always a bit rubbish. And then I put it to the side again, come back to it later, edit it, take out what doesn't work, add things that make it work better. And then when I'm satisfied, I tend to send it off. Usually I work with an editor, so they will always come back to me and say, can you clarify this? Can you change that? That doesn't make sense. So I usually go through 2 or 3 rounds of revisions. So it's kind of a stop-start process. There can be long stretches where I'm not actively writing, but it's kind of always playing at the back of my mind, almost like a screensaver on a computer almost. So there's a lot of times when I don't seem to be working, but actually I am working, even if I'm not actively writing or thinking about my argument. And then when I do sit down behind my laptop and get the work done, it tends to happen quite quickly, because I've already thought about it before I actually start writing. That's a difficult one, because it was kind of a different version of a much longer piece. So I think I worked on it for about maybe 6 months, but not constantly. So I had other projects on the go as well. So I think if you put it together, I think I wrote the whole thing maybe in about 3 weeks, but those 3 weeks were spread out across many months. Well, I used to teach at university, so I used to have a lot of students, and obviously my own writing practice has evolved. I didn't always work like this. And I think, how do I find a topic is the number one question I got. And I think the mistake people often make is wanting to cram too much into one essay, especially at college, where you can only write about 3,000 words. So that's not that much, actually. So I always told them, narrow it down. You might have an amazing idea, but it's simply too big. You can't do it justice in the amount of words you got. So don't be afraid to put ideas to the side and focus on one thing. And also, especially if you're a lot younger, think about your grammar, because a lot of people are really insecure about their writing, and they're like, well, I'm not good enough, that my grammar isn't great. Well, that's something you can work on. And I find, if you know your adverbs from your adjectives, it just becomes so much easier to say what you want to say. So don't be afraid to, seek help. A lot of universities offer courses. You can even do stuff online that's completely free. So if you feel that you need to do work in that respect, do it. And also get other people to read and comment on your work. And, don't just ask your mum, because she's going to love whatever you do. But also ask friends or, other people whose opinion you trust to read your work and give you feedback on how you could make it better. Because that's how I've learned most, from other people that pointed out bits of my argument that didn't work, things I should work on. So don't just sit there by yourself and do your work, but connect with others. And obviously return the favour and read their work in return and learn from what they do. Well, I would say if you cannot summarise your argument in one sentence, that probably means that you have to work on narrowing it down. Because, as I mentioned before, a lot of people try to cram too much into one essay. I used to be guilty of that myself. So, do as I say, not as I do in that respect. and you can always recycle your ideas. If you can't use something in one essay, just put it to the side, keep it in a folder on your computer or in a notebook, and develop it later. So I think, by setting yourself a very specific task, you make it easy for yourself. And what I tend to do these days is just, once I've kind of got my argument down and I know what I want to say, subdivide it, because usually I need to make a couple of points to get to where I want to be. So I will literally have a list of points I want to make and write a section for each of them. And it's taken me a lot of trial and error to get that far. So I think, for a younger person or someone less experienced, that might not be realistic. But it's a good thing to aim towards, because if you just start writing, you often end up waffling or writing, going off on a tangent. So I think by spending a bit more time preparing and writing, an essay plan before you actually set off writing, you're saving yourself a lot of trouble. It's almost like as if you're going on a journey and you make a kind of roadmap for yourself, and you're like, that's where I want to go and this is how I'm going to get there. So my number one advice would be make a plan. Don't start off straight away, but take a little more time at the beginning to think about what you want to do and how you want to get there. I've self-published a novella, Hell, earlier, last year actually. It was nominated when it was still unpublished for the Dyslexia Novella Prize in 2019, I think. And I decided to self-publish it. And it's kind of a gothic novel. I really like writers like Edgar Allan Poe, so I thought it'd be fun to write something like that. And I also wanted to experience what it'd be like to self-publish something, which wasn't something I'd done before. So it was a really interesting project in that respect. And obviously, it's not been as easy to promote it as it would have been without COVID, but it's been an interesting journey and it's still ongoing.